The lights inside the penthouse were bright, maybe too bright. They shone down from the high ceiling, bouncing off the crystal glasses and the expensive jewelry worn by the people below. The music was loud, a heavy bass that thumped in everyone's chest, but nobody seemed to mind. In fact, they seemed to like it. The room was filled with laughter and the sound of ice clinking against silver stirrers. It was the kind of party that people read about in magazines. The kind where the guest list was more important than the food. Yet, for Victoria, the noise felt like a wall she couldn't climb over. She stood near the edge of the room, her back pressed against the cool glass of a massive window. Outside, the city was a grid of yellow and white lights, stretching all the way to the horizon. It looked peaceful from the 30th floor. Down there, people were going home to their families, eating dinner or watching television. Up here, everything was different. Up here, the air smelled like expensive perfume and leather. Victoria took a small sip of her drink. It was something golden and fizzy, but it tasted sharp to her. She looked around at the crowd. These were the city's most successful people. There were men in tailored suits who shook hands like they were making a deal, and women in designer gowns who air-kissed each other's cheeks while checking their phones. They all wanted something. It wasn't money they needed. They all had plenty of that. They wanted influence. They wanted connections. For the last hour, Victoria had been nodding and smiling. A man with a thick watch had spent 10 minutes explaining his new investment strategy to her, barely pausing to breathe. A woman with bright red lipstick had told a story about her yacht, making sure Victoria knew exactly how much it cost to fuel. They treated her like a prize, a shiny object to be won. But nobody had asked her how she was. Nobody had looked her in the eye and seen a person. They only saw the name on the invitation and the bank account attached to it. She let out a long, slow breath. It fogged the glass for a second before disappearing. This was supposed to be a celebration. Her company had just finished a massive merger, one that the news channels were calling the deal of the decade. She should have been happy. She should have been in the middle of the room, laughing and telling stories. Instead, she felt a heavy weight sitting on her chest. It was a lonely feeling, kind that doesn't go away even when you are surrounded by 500 people. The band changed songs. The drummer picked up the pace, and the saxophone player started a fast, complicated solo. The noise level rose again. Victoria felt a headache starting to form behind her eyes. She needed a break. She needed to find a spot where nobody knew who she was, or at least where nobody cared. She pushed herself away from the window. Holding her glass tightly, she began to weave through the crowd. It was difficult. Every few steps, someone stopped her. Victoria. Congratulations. You have to come see the view from the balcony. Incredible party. Simply incredible. She flashed a polite smile. Thank you, she said, over and over again. Excuse me just a moment? She kept moving, her heels clicking softly on the marble floor. She moved like a ghost, gliding past the groups of wealthy guests. Without really being seen, she made her way toward a hallway at the side of the main ballroom. The lights here were dimmer, and the noise of the party faded into a dull hum. There were fewer people here. Just a few couples sitting on velvet sofas, speaking in low voices. Victoria kept walking until she reached a heavy curtain that partitioned off a smaller lounge area. She pushed the curtain aside and stepped through. The change in atmosphere was instant. The heavy bass from the main room was gone, replaced by the quiet, elegant sound of a piano. It wasn't loud music. It was soft, weaving through the air like smoke. This area was much quieter. The lights were turned down low, casting long shadows across the plush carpet. There were small round tables with candles flickering in the center, in the corner. Almost hidden behind a large potted fern was a grand piano. And sitting at the piano was a young man. Victoria stopped. She didn't know why, but something made her hesitate. The man wasn't dressed like the other guests. He wasn't wearing a tuxedo that cost thousands of dollars. He wore a simple black jacket, the kind musicians wear, and a clean white shirt. He looked young, maybe in his late 20s, with dark hair that fell slightly over his forehead as he played. He wasn't looking at the crowd. He wasn't trying to catch anyone's eye. He was just looking at his hands. He played with a gentle touch. It wasn't showy music. It wasn't meant to impress a room full of investors. It was sad, in a beautiful way. The melody floated up and down, full of longing. It felt honest. Victoria found herself walking closer. She sat on a high stool near the edge of the small lounge, just watching him. For a few minutes, she forgot about the merger. She forgot about the speeches she had to give later. She just listened. The musician seemed to be in his own world. He swayed slightly, his eyes closed, his fingers moving across the keys with ease. He didn't have the desperate look that the people in the main room had. He didn't look like he was trying to sell anything. He just looked like he was sharing a piece of his mind. It was strange, but watching him made Victoria feel a little less lonely. He was a stranger, completely anonymous in a city full of famous people. Yet, his music felt more personal than anything. Anyone had said to her all night, she looked at the empty space on the bench next to him. Usually, there would be a line of people waiting to talk to the performer, or maybe women trying to get his attention. But here, nobody was paying attention. The guests in this lounge were too busy talking about stock prices or vacation homes. They treated the piano player like furniture, just background noise to fill the silence between their conversations. But Victoria heard him. She really heard him. She finished her drink and set the empty glass down on a small table. The pianist played a final chord, letting the sound ring out and fade into silence. Then his hands dropped to his lap. He opened his eyes and stretched his fingers. Victoria felt a sudden urge to speak to him. She didn't want a business deal. She didn't want a network. She just wanted to connect with something real. She stood up and smoothed the front of her dress. The silk fabric felt cool under her fingers. This was the first time all night. She actually wanted to walk towards someone instead of away from them. She took a step forward, her curiosity outweighing her fatigue. The pianist adjusted the sheet music in front of him, unaware that the guest of honor was standing just a few feet away, watching him with a newfound sense of wonder. Victoria took a slow breath. The air in this quiet corner of the lounge feeling lighter than the heavy atmosphere of the main ballroom. She adjusted her clutch purse, feeling the cool leather against her fingers, and took the final few steps toward the piano. The sound of her heels on the thick carpet was muffled, barely a whisper. But the young man seemed to sense someone approaching. He looked up from the keys. His eyes were a soft, dark brown, and when he saw her, he didn't immediately look down at his hands or scan the room behind her to see who else was coming. He just waited. He didn't have the hungry look that the investors had, nor did he have the polite but bored look of the waiters. He looked calm, like a still lake in the middle of a chaotic forest. Victoria leaned against the side of the piano, letting the wooden edge support her weight. She felt tired, not just in her muscles, but deep in her bones. It was a specific kind of tired that came from holding up a mask for hours. From smiling when she didn't feel like it, and from pretending to be interested in things that didn't matter. "You're very good," she said. Her voice was quieter than she intended, almost lost in the low hum of the room. "I didn't think anyone in this place knew how to play anything that wasn't loud." The pianist offered a small, modest smile. He didn't brag or thank her profusely. He just nodded once. "Thank you," he said simply. His voice was deep and steady. Sometimes the music needs to be quiet so people can hear themselves think. Victoria let out a short, dry laugh. "That's exactly what they don't want," she said, gesturing vaguely back toward the main hall where the noise was still leaking in. "If they thought too much, they might realize how much time they're wasting." The young man watched her. He didn't pull away or look uncomfortable with her sudden honesty. He just listened. It was so rare to find someone who just listened. Usually when she spoke, people were already planning their next sentence, thinking about how they could turn the conversation back to themselves. "I'm hiding," Victoria admitted after a moment. She felt a little silly saying it out loud to a stranger, but the words just slipped out. "I've been hiding for about an hour now. If I go back out there, I have to listen to 3 more men tell me why they are geniuses." The pianist's expression softened a little. He turned slightly on the bench to face her more directly. "It sounds exhausting," he said. It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact. He saw the fatigue in her posture, the way her shoulders slumped slightly forward. "It is," she agreed. She looked down at the black and white keys. I used to love these parties, you know? I used to love the energy. But lately, it just feels like work. Everyone wants a piece of the pie. But nobody wants to know who baked it. He tilted his head to the side, considering her words. Maybe you need a different recipe, he said softly. Victoria blinked. She looked at him, really looked at him for the first time. He was young, probably struggling to make a living playing gigs at fancy parties like this. Yet he seemed more grounded than anyone she had met in years. He didn't care about her stock price or her net worth. He was just talking to her like she was a normal human being. A sudden, reckless feeling bubbled up inside her. It was the same feeling she used to get when she was younger and took risks in her business before the lawyers and accountants took over. She wanted to break the tension. She wanted to say something that wasn't scripted, something that wasn't polite. She looked at his hands resting on the keys. They were strong hands, capable of making such beautiful music. Do you know La Vie en Rose? She asked, a playful tone creeping into her voice. It was a classic song, one of the most famous melodies in the world. Every piano player knew it. The musician nodded. I know it. It's a beautiful song. I love that song, Victoria said. She stepped a little closer, a mischievous smile tugging at the corners of her lips. She felt the weight of the evening lifting just a little bit. You know, my mother used to play it for me when I was little. It always made me feel safe. She paused, looking him in the eye. She was going to make a joke. It was a way to test him, to see if he would laugh along or if he would take it seriously. Most men in this room would have laughed a loud, fake laugh and tried to use the moment to flirt aggressively. Well, she said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, if you play it for me right now, and if you play it well enough to make me feel like a kid again, I might just marry you, she laughed immediately after saying it. It was a soft, breezy laugh, meant to show she was just kidding. She expected him to chuckle, maybe shake his head and say something like, I don't think your husband would like that, or that's a high price for one song. She expected the wall of polite social distance to stay up, but the young man didn't laugh. He didn't smile. He didn't look away. He didn't treat it like a joke. He just looked at her, his gaze intense and focused, as if he was looking right through her expensive dress and her title to the person underneath. The silence between them stretched out heavy and electric. The air in the lounge seemed to change. The laughter from the main hall felt miles away now. Victoria's smile faltered slightly. She felt exposed, as if she had said something incredibly vulnerable without meaning to. She shifted her weight, feeling a sudden flush of embarrassment. Why didn't he say something? Why did he just stare? I was joking, she stammered quickly, trying to backtrack. It's just a saying. I didn't mean okay, he said. He cut her off gently, his voice calm and certain. Okay? She asked, confused. Okay, he repeated. I will play it. Turned back to the piano. He didn't check his sheet music. He didn't ask her what key she preferred or how fast she wanted it. He just sat up straighter, his entire demeanor shifting from a relaxed background player to a serious artist. He placed his hands on the keys, his fingers finding the starting position without looking. Victoria stood there, frozen. She hadn't expected this. She had expected a witty comeback or a polite deflection. She hadn't expected him to accept the challenge so boldly. It felt like the ground had shifted beneath her feet. She wasn't the powerful CEO making a joke with the help anymore. She was just a woman waiting for a song. A few people from the nearby tables had noticed the pause in the music. They stopped their conversations and glanced over. The air grew quiet. The pianist didn't seem to notice the audience. He wasn't playing for them. He was playing for her. He took a deep breath, filling his lungs, and let it out slowly. Then he pressed down on the keys. The first note was clear and bright, cutting through the silence like a bell. It wasn't a jazzed-up, complicated version. It wasn't fast. It was slow, deliberate. He played the introduction with a tenderness that made Victoria's breath catch in her throat. It wasn't just a melody. It was a memory. It was the sound of rainy afternoons and old vinyl records. It was the sound of comfort. She watched his hands move. He wasn't showing off his technique. He wasn't trying to impress anyone with how fast he could play. Every note was chosen with care. He lingered on the chords, letting the sound resonate in the air before moving to the next one. It was as if he was trying to tell her a story without using any words. Victoria felt the muscles in her neck relax. She hadn't realized how tight they were until that moment. The noise of the party, the stress of the merger, the weight of her reputation, it all seemed to melt away, dissolving into the music. There was only the piano, the man playing it. And she had made a joke about marriage, a throwaway line to cut through the boredom. But as the melody washed over her, she realized that no one had ever done anything like this for her. Men had bought her diamonds. They had taken her to Paris on private jets. They had written her contracts worth millions. But no one had ever simply listened to her and given her exactly what she needed in return. The pianist closed his eyes, his head bowing slightly as he moved into the chorus. The music swelled, rich and warm. It wrapped around her like a blanket. For the first time all night, Victoria didn't feel like running away. She didn't feel like hiding. She felt seen. The joke hung in the air between them, heavy and unanswered. She watched him, her heart beating a little faster than before. She had asked for a miracle, a simple song to fix a complicated life. And somehow, against all logic, this stranger was actually trying to give it to her. The young man did not play a single note right away. He just sat there, his fingers resting lightly on the white keys, absorbing the silence of the room. This pause was not awkward. It was heavy with meaning. It felt like the moment just before an actor steps onto the stage, or the quiet seconds before a storm breaks. Victoria stood perfectly still, her breath caught in her chest. The playful smile she had worn just moments ago had completely faded. She realized then that he wasn't treating her request as a joke. He wasn't treating it as a command from a powerful woman either. He was treating it as a pact. Slowly, deliberately, he reached out and adjusted the microphone stand. He pulled it slightly closer to the piano, angling it just right to catch the richness of the sound, but not the noise of his breathing. He didn't look at the crowd of guests who were now turning their heads in curiosity. He didn't look at the waiters who were paused mid-step, trays held high. He only looked at the instrument in front of him. Then he cracked his knuckles. It was a sharp, crisp sound that seemed to cut through the low hum of the air conditioning. It was a simple, human sound, rough and unpolished. It was the kind of thing people usually tried to hide at elegant events like this, but he did it without shame. It was as if he was saying, asterisk, I am about to work. And this is how I prepare. Asterisk. Victoria felt a strange chill run down her arms, despite the warmth of the room. She watched his hands. They weren't the soft, manicured hands she was used to shaking at business meetings. They were strong, with visible veins and a callus or two on the fingertips. These were hands that worked for a living. He placed his left foot on the sustain pedal, testing it gently. A low, harmonic hum vibrated through the floorboards. He seemed satisfied. He took a deep, slow breath, his chest rising and falling under his plain black jacket. For a moment, he closed his eyes. In that brief second of darkness, everything changed. He wasn't just a hired musician anymore. The air around the piano seemed to shift, becoming charged with electricity. The people in the lounge, who had been chatting loudly about stocks and vacations, sensed it too. One by one, they fell silent. The clinking of silverware stopped. A hush spread outward from the piano like a ripple in a pond. He opened his eyes and looked down at the keys. He didn't need sheet music. He didn't need to read the notes to tell a story that had been written in his heart long before tonight. Then, his fingers moved. The first note wasn't the standard, cheerful opening of the song that everyone knows from the radio. It was lower, slower, and filled with a deep, aching sadness. It resonated through the grand piano, vibrating against the wood and out into the room. It was a sound that demanded attention. It said, "Stop what you were doing and listen." Victoria felt her knees weaken slightly. She reached out and steadied herself against the smooth side of the piano. She knew this song. Of course she did. She had heard it 1,000 times at weddings, in movies, and on the radio. But she had never heard it like this. He wasn't playing La Vie en Rose. He was playing the feeling of it. He was playing the rose before it blooms, the thorn that pricks the finger. The love, that hurts as much as it heals. The melody began to unfold. Not in a rush, but with the slow, deliberate pace of someone walking through a memory. He played with a soft touch, barely pressing the keys at times, making the music whisper like a secret. Then, in a sudden swell of emotion, he would press harder, and the sound would rise up, filling the high ceiling of the penthouse. Crying out with a voice that was almost human, Victoria found she couldn't look away from his face. He wasn't smiling, and he wasn't frowning. He looked peaceful, yet intense. Every note seemed to cost him something, as if he was giving a piece of himself away with every measure. He was completely exposed in a way that terrified most people. She looked around the room at the other guests. A man in a tuxedo, who had been laughing loudly just 5 minutes ago, was now staring at the floor, his jaw tight. A woman in a sequined dress had her hand over her mouth, her eyes wide. The music was stripping away their armor. It was bypassing their polite manners and their social status and going straight to the parts of them that remembered what it felt like. To be truly alive, it was a dangerous thing to do. To play so honestly in a room full of masks. But the pianist didn't seem to care about the danger. He was playing for the woman standing beside him. He was playing because she had asked. Victoria remembered her joke, the silly, reckless words she had thrown at him. Asterisk, play this song, and I'll marry you. But now. Hearing the music, the joke didn't seem funny anymore. It didn't seem like a joke at all. It felt like a prayer she hadn't known she was praying. She thought about her life, the meetings, the mergers, the endless cycle of winning and earning. She thought about the empty apartment she went home to every night. For years, she had been building a fortress around herself, thinking that success would keep her safe. But listening to this music, she realized the fortress was actually a prison. The song shifted. The tempo stayed slow, but the right hand began to dance a little more, adding delicate, intricate flourishes to the melody. It was like sunlight trying to break through a heavy cloud cover. It was hopeful, but fragile. It was the sound of possibility. Victoria felt tears stinging the corners of her eyes. She tried to blink them away, not wanting to ruin her makeup, but they refused to stop. It wasn't just sadness she felt. It was a strange mixture of relief and longing. She hadn't realized how much she needed this a moment of pure, uncalculated beauty in a world that was entirely calculated. The pianist leaned into the instrument, his body swaying slightly. His left hand was keeping a steady heartbeat rhythm on the lower notes, anchoring the song while his right hand explored the melody, wandering and finding new paths. He was improvising. He was making the song up as he went along, letting his feelings guide him. There was no safety net, no sheet music to tell him what to do if he made a mistake. But he didn't make mistakes. He made choices. Every choice seemed to say, I hear you. He heard the loneliness in her voice when she spoke of hiding. He heard the desperation in her joke. And he was answering her. He was telling her that she wasn't the only one who felt things deeply. He was telling her that it was okay to be tired. It was okay to want something real. The room was entirely silent now. Even the staff from the kitchen had wandered to the edge of the doorway, holding trays, mesmerized by the sound. The pianist had them all in the palm of his hand, yet he wasn't performing for them. He was performing for an audience of one. He played a series of chords that climbed higher and higher, tension building in the air like a violin string being tightened. He held the final high note, letting it ring out, clear and bright, hanging in the air like a star. Then he slowly released the pedal, letting the sound fade away until there was nothing left but the quiet hum of the room and the sound of the city far below. He didn't lift his hands from the keys immediately. He kept his head bowed, his fingers touching the ivory, as if he was saying a final goodbye to the notes he had just created. The silence that followed was heavier and more profound than any applause. It was the kind of silence that happens when something true has been spoken. When a spell has been cast that no one wants to break. Victoria stood there, her hand still resting on the piano, her heart beating in time with the fading echo of the music. She felt stripped bare, raw, and completely alive. She had asked a stranger for a song, and he had given her a mirror. She looked at his bowed head, waiting for him to look up, wondering what she could possibly say to him now. The distance between them, the vast gap between the millionaire and the musician, had been dissolved by the music. They were just two people in a quiet room, connected by a melody. The silence that followed was not empty. It was full. It was heavy with something that felt like magic, or maybe just the sudden return of feelings that had been suppressed for too long. In the main ballroom, the party went on. The bass was still thumping. Champagne was still flowing, but here, in this small, dimly lit corner of the penthouse, the world had stopped spinning. No one spoke. No one moved. It was as if the pianist had poured a liquid calm over the entire lounge, and nobody wanted to be the first one to disturb it. Victoria stood perfectly still, her hand resting on the cool wood of the piano. She realized she was holding her breath. Slowly, she let it out, a shaky exhale that she didn't quite recognize as her own. The music had stopped, but the melody was still vibrating in her chest, echoing in her bones. It was a strange sensation. It's like waking up from a vivid dream and not knowing which world is real. The pianist kept his head bowed for a long moment. His hands were still resting on the keys, lingering there as if he was saying a silent goodbye to the sound he had just created. He didn't turn around to bow. He didn't look for applause. He seemed to be in a trance, a private moment of reflection that he was sharing with the instrument. Victoria looked at his face. He looked peaceful. There was no pride in his expression, no looking around to see if the important people were watching. He just looked like a man who had finished a hard day's work and was satisfied with what he had done. It was so different from the men she dealt with every day. They always wanted a pat on the back. They always wanted a bonus or a headline. He just wanted to play the song. She blinked, and a single tear escaped, sliding down her cheek. It was warm against her skin. She quickly wiped it away with the back of her hand, embarrassed to be crying in front of a stranger, especially a stranger she had just met. But as she looked around the room, she saw she wasn't the only one. The man in the expensive tuxedo, the one who had been laughing loudly earlier, was staring at the floor with a glassy look in his eyes. A woman near the bar was clutching her purse, her lips pressed together tightly as if she was fighting back a sob. The music had unlocked something in all of them. It had slipped past the expensive suits and the fake smiles and touched the lonely parts that everyone hides. It was a reminder that under all the money and the status, everyone is just human. Everyone gets sad. Everyone longs for something real. Victoria took a small step closer to the bench. She wanted to say something. She wanted to tell him that it was the most beautiful thing she had ever heard. She wanted to tell him that he had saved her night, maybe even saved her a little bit of herself. But the words felt clumsy and heavy in her mouth. How do you thank someone for giving you a moment of pure truth? You did it, she whispered. Her voice was barely audible, cracking under the weight of the emotion. The young man lifted his head slowly. He turned to look at her. His dark brown eyes were soft, lacking any sharpness. He didn't look surprised by her reaction. He didn't look awkward that she was crying. He just looked at her with a gentle understanding, like he knew exactly why she had asked for that song. I just played what you asked for, he said quietly. His voice was deep and raspy, cutting through the quiet room. You played more than that, Victoria said, shaking her head slightly. She felt a lump in her throat that made it hard to speak. You played like you meant it. Like you actually cared. I always care, he said simply. He shrugged his shoulders, a small, humble movement. Music isn't worth playing if you don't mean it. Otherwise, it's just noise. Victoria felt a sudden, intense urge to sit down next to him. She wanted to ask him where he learned to play like that. She wanted to know his story. Was he a struggling artist? Did he play in empty bars for tips? He had so much talent, so much soul, and he was sitting here in the corner, playing background music for people who didn't even listen. She opened her clutch, her fingers fumbling for a card. I have to pay you, she said, her voice becoming more businesslike out of habit. It was the only way she knew how to show gratitude. I want to hire you. For my next event, or a private party, anything. Just name your price. She started to pull out a card, but he held up a hand to stop her. It wasn't a rude gesture. It was just a calm, firm boundary. I don't want your money, he said. Victoria froze. Her hand was halfway out of her purse. I don't understand, she stammered. Everyone wants money. Not everyone, he said. He looked down at the keys again, his fingers tracing the ivory edges. You asked me to play a song. I played it. That was the deal. We are even. Victoria felt a flush of heat rise to her face. She was confused. No one in her world did something for nothing. There was always a catch. There was always an angle. But looking at him, she realized he wasn't playing a game. He wasn't trying to trick her. He was just being honest. He played because she asked, and because he wanted to play. That was it. She put the card back in her purse. The gesture felt significant, like she was closing the door on her old way of doing things, if only for a moment. I don't even know your name, she said softly. Does it matter? He asked. He looked at her with a faint, mysterious smile. Tonight, I'm just the piano player. You're just the woman who wanted to hear a song. Sometimes it's better that way. No names, no titles. Just the music. Victoria thought about this. She was the most powerful woman in the room. Maybe the most powerful woman in the building. But right now, she didn't feel powerful. She felt small, and for the first time in a long time, she felt okay with being small. She didn't need to be the boss. She didn't need to be in charge. She just needed to be the person who listened. She looked at the people around the room. The spell was starting to break. The man in the tuxedo had shaken his head and looked at his watch, clearing his throat. The waiters were starting to move again, checking tables. The reality of the party was creeping back in, loud and demanding. But the moment between her and the pianist was still alive. It was a tiny bubble of peace in the chaos. I've never heard anyone play like that, she said again, needing him to know. You made me feel seen. That sounds stupid, doesn't it? It doesn't sound stupid, he said. He stood up slowly from the bench. He was taller than she realized. He smoothed down his black jacket, looking ordinary again, just a guy in a suit. But when he looked at her, she saw the artist still burning inside. We all want to be seen, Victoria. Even the people who think they have it all. He used her name. It wasn't an announcement, just a quiet acknowledgement that he knew who she was. He had known all along. He knew she was the hostess, the millionaire, the CEO, and he didn't care. He saw past the name tag and the magazine covers. He saw the tired woman who needed a song. Victoria felt a wave of gratitude so strong it nearly knocked her over. She wanted to hug him, but she didn't. No, that would be crossing a line. Instead, she just nodded, unable to find the right words. She felt a shift inside her, like a heavy stone being lifted off her heart. The loneliness was still there, hovering in the background, but it didn't feel quite so crushing anymore. She had been given a gift tonight, a rare and precious gift of genuine connection. Thank you, she said. This time, the words didn't feel empty. They felt full. They felt like a promise. The pianist smiled, a genuine, warm smile that reached his eyes. You're welcome, he said. Don't work too hard. The party will still be there tomorrow, but moments like this, they don't wait. He reached down to the floor and picked up a worn leather bag. He slipped his sheet music inside, the papers yellowed and dog-eared from years of use. He zipped it up, throwing the strap over his shoulder. It was such a mundane action, packing up his gear to leave, but it felt dramatic to Victoria. It felt like the ending of a movie, just before the credits roll. He was leaving. The night was over. Panic fluttered in her chest. She wanted to stop him. She wanted to ask him to stay, to play another song, to talk to her until the sun came up. But she knew she couldn't. That was the deal. That was the beauty of it. He wasn't for sale. He wasn't an employee. He was a beautiful, fleeting moment in her life, and she had to let him go. Goodbye, she whispered. He didn't say goodbye. He didn't look back. He just gave a small, respectful nod and turned toward the exit, walking away with a quiet confidence. Leaving her standing there by the piano, changed forever. Victoria watched him walk away. The distance between them grew with every step he took toward the service exit. He didn't look back. Not once. His posture was relaxed, the leather bag slung over his shoulder, moving with a rhythm that was completely his own. He didn't seem to care about the expensive art on the walls or the crystal chandeliers above his head. He was just leaving, as easily as if he had finished a cup of coffee and was heading out into the afternoon sun. She waited, holding her breath, half expecting him to stop. She thought maybe he would pause at the door, turn around, and give her a chance to ask for his number. Or maybe she expected security to stop him, to ask where he was going. But nobody stopped him. The security guards by the exit saw the instrument bag and just gave a small nod, opening the side gate for him. They didn't know that the man walking out of the building had just held the entire room in the palm of his hand. They just saw the hired help leaving for the night. The heavy metal panel slid shut behind him with a soft thud, and then he was gone. Victoria stood there, alone in the quiet corner of the lounge. The silence that had been so beautiful only moments ago suddenly felt empty. The air felt colder now that the music had stopped and the musician had left. The spell was broken. Reality came rushing back in. She could hear the main party again, the distant thumping of the bass, the roar of hundreds of conversations mixing together, the sound of glasses clinking. The noise from the ballroom spilled into the lounge, aggressive and demanding. It was like waking up from a wonderful dream to find that it is raining outside, and you have to go to work. The guests around her started to move again. The man in the tuxedo shook his head as if he was trying to clear water out of his ears, and immediately pulled his phone out of his pocket. He started typing furiously, his face hardening back into the mask of a businessman. The woman near the bar touched her eyes one last time, then grabbed her purse and marched toward the crowd, her high heels clicking sharply on the floor. The magic of the piano song faded from their faces, replaced by the urgent need to be seen, to network. To be important, Victoria felt a strange ache in her chest. It was a sharp physical pain, like a stitch in her side. She realized that while the music had made her feel alive, the pianist leaving made her feel lonely again. But it was a different kind of loneliness. It wasn't the heavy, gray fog she had felt earlier. This was a sharp, clear feeling. She knew exactly what she wanted now. She didn't want the merger. She didn't want the praise. She wanted that connection. She wanted the honesty. She looked at the empty bench. It looked so ordinary now. Just a piece of black leather and wood. It was hard to believe that such a profound experience had happened right there. She took a step toward the exit he had used, her instinct telling her to run after him. She could catch him. She could stop him in the lobby. She could offer him a job, a car, a house. She could use her power to make him stay. But her feet felt heavy, like they were stuck in concrete. She stopped walking. She whispered to herself. She realized that chasing him would ruin it. If she ran after him with her checkbook and her contracts, she would turn him into just another employee. She would turn that beautiful song into a transaction. He had given her a gift because he wanted to, not because she paid him to. If she tried to buy him now, she would be insulting everything he had just done. She understood then that he was right. Moments like that don't wait. You can't capture them and put them in a bank account. You just have to be there when they happen, and you have to let them go when they are over. That was the lesson. The song was free, and so was the feeling it gave her. Victoria straightened her back. She took a deep breath and smoothed the front of her dress. She reached into her clutch and pulled out a small mirror. She looked at her reflection. Her eyes were a little red, and her makeup was slightly smudged, but she looked different. She looked softer. The hardness around her eyes, the look of constant calculation that she wore like armor, was gone. She put the mirror away. She didn't fix her makeup. She didn't care if she looked perfect anymore. She felt real, and for the first time in years, that was enough. She turned and walked back toward the main ballroom. The noise hit her like a physical wave. A waiter walked by with a tray of drinks. "Champagne, ma'am?" he asked automatically, his eyes glazed over from a long night of work. "No, thank you," Victoria said. She didn't take the glass. "Just water, please. Please." The waiter looked surprised, then nodded. "Yes, ma'am." She moved through the crowd. She saw the man who had been talking about his investment strategy earlier. He was waving his hands, telling a story to a group of nodding men. He saw Victoria, and his eyes lit up. He opened his mouth to speak. ready to pitch his deal again. Victoria looked at him. She didn't feel angry. She didn't feel annoyed. She just saw a man who was playing a part just like she had been. She gave him a small, genuine smile. "Excuse me," she said gently, walking past him. "I have somewhere to be." She didn't have anywhere specific to be, but she needed to move. She needed to feel the floor under her feet. She walked past the ice sculpture and the flower arrangements that cost more than a car. She walked out of the ballroom and into the lobby of the hotel. The night air was cool. When she stepped out of the revolving doors, it was crisp and smelled like exhaust fumes and rain from earlier in the day, but to her, it smelled like freedom. There were cars waiting at the curb, taxis and black limousines. Her driver was standing there, holding the door open to her car, waiting to take her to her empty penthouse. She walked up to him, but didn't get in. She stood on the sidewalk for a moment, looking up at the sky. The city lights blocked out most of the stars. She thought she could see one faint light twinkling high above the buildings. She realized she wasn't going home to sit in the dark and think about work. She wasn't going to go upstairs and stare at the view. She wanted to walk. She wanted to be among people who were living real lives. "Cancel the car," she told the driver. "I'm going to walk, ma'am." The driver asked, confused. "It's late. It's 20 blocks to your building." "I know," she said. "I'd like to walk. Good night." She started walking down the sidewalk. The city was bustling even at this hour. There were groups of tourists taking pictures, couples holding hands, and workers heading home from late shifts. Victoria walked right in the middle of them. She wasn't the CEO of a tech giant right now. She was just a woman in a nice dress, taking a walk. She passed a small jazz bar a few blocks away. Through the open window, she could hear a piano playing. It was a different song, a faster, happier tune, but it made her stop and listen for a moment. She smiled to herself. She listened to the music, then kept walking. She thought about the pianist's hands. She thought about the way he looked at her, not with greed, but with understanding. He had seen her, really seen her. And because he saw her, she was starting to see herself again. She wasn't a machine built for making money. She was a person who felt things deeply. She was a person who loved a sad song because it reminded her that she was alive. The marriage proposal she had joked about didn't seem funny anymore, and it didn't seem like a fantasy either. It wasn't about actually marrying him. It was about the promise behind the joke, the promise that if you find someone who understands your soul, you hold on to them. She hadn't found him to keep, but she had found him to wake herself up. Victoria walked faster, her heels clicking on the pavement. Her stride was confident. The heavy weight that had been on her shoulders all night was gone. She felt light. She felt like she could fly. The city stretched out in front of her, full of noise and chaos, full of strangers who might be hiding their own sadness or their own beautiful songs. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring. She didn't know if she would ever see the piano player again. Probably not. But that was okay. He had given her something better than a business deal or a merger. He had given her back her heart. She turned the corner. Heading toward the river, humming the melody of La Via rose softly to herself. She didn't care who heard. She wasn't hiding anymore.